Sorry. And so yeah, thank you, AJ, for helping me with that. So yeah, now that we're recording, I'll give a little overview of this new zoning proposal that we're working on here at City Planning and in collaboration with some of our Oakland stakeholders. And I think maybe on that note, because I think Andrea just jumped in. Speaking of our Oakland stakeholders, would it be okay if we allowed OPDC to kind of introduce themselves? Andrea?
Hi, I'm so sorry that I am late. I got caught up talking to Sabina Dietrich's class at Pitt, and the time escaped me. Apologies, everybody.
No.
There's not a whole lot to introduce here. Just wanted to point out that we have a Let's Talk event coming up on the 18th, which is an introduction to permits, licenses, and inspections. If you've ever wondered how to get a building permit or how to appeal a citation or a lot of other kinds of questions that people run up against all the time, this is your chance to ask the PLI inspectors. Aside from that, we have a monthly calendar. You can always check us out at opdc.org/events. And here I am.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And so, yeah, so thinking about the Oakland plan, which is neighborhood plan, that kind of lays the groundwork for this new zoning that we're proposing. And one of the major themes was the growth of housing and job opportunities, and understanding how do we meet current and future demands for both housing and jobs in Oakland, where really it is the center of activity in Pittsburgh, where there is a major employment centers and a major residential population, both, students and others, families, and a variety of residents. So kind of all those dynamics come together, and the plan thought about how do we grow in terms of those populations. And so another thing about the zoning is zoning, is law, and it's kind of stuck in time until you update it and amend it. And, some of the zoning districts in Oakland had been in place, really for decades or more. But, as the city grows, its goals and its needs, change over time. And so we think about what the city thinks about housing, what the city thinks about the quality of the design of its buildings, what we think about sustainability, what we think about mobility, how we get around. A lot of those things have grown and evolved over these, many years, decades, but sometimes zoning can stay in place. And so that's the big reason why we're here, to propose zoning that really, fits the current and future needs of the community. And a lot of this groundwork, foundational work, was done in the Oakland plan. And there was already one package of zoning that was adopted based on those recommendations from the plan back in February of 2023. This was parts of Central and South Oakland. So like the 5th Forbes corridor and some residential areas to the south, as well as along the Boulevard of the Allies. In some of those districts, there was a process, maybe some of you were part of it, to adopt those based on the recommendations of the plan. And what we're doing today is kind of doing the second piece of that, focusing on North Oakland. So I want to stress that we're not starting from scratch. The zoning districts we're going to talk about are actually already adopted, so we're not drafting new text. And so if it seems like it's a little bit lighter of a lift, that's actually a good thing. That's the product of planning that set us up for success. And so what we're going to be proposing here is a pretty well developed draft. We've had a lot of input. We'll talk about the engagement that we've done so far. There's definitely still time for kind of small minor tweaks here and there, and that's why we're here to get your questions and comments to see how we can maybe continue to massage and improve this proposal as we move forward. So so with that, just kind of the big overview. We talked about the Oakland plan. There was a land use strategy, which we'll get into, which really thought about the future development of Oakland, and it sets kind of the guidelines and recommendations for what the zoning is. We're going to be talking about 2 zoning districts, and you'll hear these time and time again: Urban Center Mixed Use, also known as UCMU, Urban Center Employment, UCE. Once again, these are adopted districts that they're working in parts of Central and South Oakland. as it's noted here, we're not really changing them. We're simply applying them to new geographies in North Oakland. And so really the work that we've been taking on is to map the zoning districts, so where these would apply, and then as well mapping the maximum building heights, because there's some flexibility in terms of how we can map those on a block by block basis. So that's kind of the overview. As we get into this land use strategy, first we'll take a look at the geography. This kind of blank area you see here, and I'll zoom in, is the area where we're proposing new zoning. So it's a pretty substantial piece of North Oakland. And I'll kind of give you a little overview. You know, as far south as this would be, you know, Forbes and South Craig coming up to 5th, along portions of North Craig, as far to the east as Neville, this would be getting into parts of Shadyside, as far west as parts of Shenley Farms, so not including that, but up to that on the west. We have Center Avenue coming across here. We continue north as we hit Balm, and North Craig continues kind of up into this area along Melwood Avenue. And then there's kind of a hillside here, Bloomfield Hill District. So that's kind of the context. It's a sizable portion. We will get into the existing zoning that was there before. But really focusing on this land use strategy, with the plan, there was a process to develop this. There was, you know, public feedback, and, you know, we hope that this strategy is in line with the vision of the community. The land use strategy provides a general framework and guidelines for all these zoning recommendations. And it's essentially the desired future vision of development as we see the community growing. And as you can see, there's different sections for different parts of the neighborhood. We're going to be focusing on this area up here, this mixed use area and employment district. All right, so we're looking at this mixed use district here, which covers a decent portion of North Oakland. And how did we come to this? Well, throughout the planning process, we looked at the existing character and uses in the area, and we found a mix of uses. You know, there's residential, there's office, there's institution, there's retail, commercial. There's also a lot of different scales in North Oakland. So we have, you know, we have some single family, we have some middle density housing. We also have some higher apartment buildings. And there's also a mix of architectural styles. So that's really what we think of as mixed use. And so I'll quickly read the goal of this area. Provide a diversity of affordable housing options for long-term residents, neighborhood amenities, local businesses, and the character, a vibrant mix of buildings of different scales, styles, and uses with active ground floors and walkable streets. So some general guidelines. We also have the height, which will come into play. So this actually recommends what this height map that we are producing should be in terms of stories without a bonus and up to stories with a bonus. And so this will apply to a major portion. And this, when we think mixed use area, this directly applies to the urban center mixed use, or the UCMU, which will take the majority of the area. And then there's another area up here known as the innovation district, or the employment area. And so we looked at the existing conditions of this site, and it's largely non-residential, industrial. There's an industrial legacy, some warehouses, some former automotive uses. Some of them continue, but some of them are kind of transitioning. We also saw some larger parcels that are somewhat underutilized, and there was potential for redevelopment. And so the plan really looked at identifying this for employment. There's a lot of details I could get into here, but essentially the existing conditions report of the plan showed that there's very limited space for redevelopment in parcels that are of a sizable scale. And so what this means is, especially for employment uses such as large lab and research and development spaces, they need kind of large footprints. And that's kind of few and far between in Oakland because it's relatively built out. And so, you know, housing is very marketable and it's very much in demand. So sometimes housing was taking up those spaces, and the plan recommended to preserve some space for these employment uses in alignment with the goals of the plan. And so that's just a little rationale for why we would preserve space for employment. Housing is a big priority, and we recommend it in many places, but there's small areas where we think about this. I'll loop back to this. There was a give and take in our initial discussions with stakeholders, and there were some concerns about the viability of this as an employment district. And what you'll see is in the proposed map, there's a little bit of a compromise. So this exact area was kind of shifted and reduced in size based on an explanation that we'll get into. So once again, a little overview of these new districts. As I said, mixed use, it kind of says it all. It's a mix of uses. And I'll get into some of the design and form of what developments we'd like to see and what the zoning kind of sets up. But I will note that, while the employment district is the other one, this also allows for employment uses. So that's a key distinction. It's not like we're excluding it here. It's just in the employment district, it's even more a priority. And then, of course, this is kind of the purpose statement of the urban center employment. These are some of the industry sectors we're thinking about when we think about employment. And one thing I will note is that some of these sectors, have lab space and research and development that have, large scale equipment. And so a majority of these workers are in, working with this equipment. So it's a little bit not as dependent on the pandemic and the work from home movement. Some of these, we still see people coming in, and there's still value for this even in a post pandemic world. And the key here is that market rate housing is limited, once again, to preserve space for employment uses. We could talk more about that. Just want to touch on some of the advantages of these new districts. They really focus on the design, the form, the character of development. And there's lots of standards that, well, we would say make sure it has the right look and feel, and it kind of fits in within the context of the neighborhood. And we'll kind of get into some of that. There's also performance points, which is kind of a balance between allowing bonus height. So buildings can be built taller, but then there has to be some type of community benefit or meeting a sustainability goal in return. So there's a balance there. We talked about the mix of uses, and then there's also public review process. So a lot of the major projects are going to have to go to planning commission. So that means there's going to be a development activities meeting. There's going to be a lot of public oversight. So whatever the new zoning proposes, it's not like buildings are just going to be developed. There will be a public process. So I think that's also, an important thing for us. Okay, so I'll quickly just go through some of the features of what these zoning districts do. And then we can certainly, if there's more questions, we can dig in. So focusing on the form and design of buildings, we prioritize urban open space. So some of the lot, as you see here, will have to be dedicated to open space that the public can enjoy, so that, the development is not taking up the whole space, but there's a little bit of a balance there. We also focus on ground floor transparency. So as you can see here, ensuring that, the first levels are inviting and engaging and not kind of closing off from the public. So there's a quality pedestrian experience and kind of the place we see where Oakland is already existing and vibrant. And then there's architectural design standards that really get into some of the details of how we make, buildings have the right look and feel. So it kind of just, like I said, just fits in and is of high quality design. That's something that this new zoning really focuses on. One thing we'll get into is thinking about kind of the bulk and scale of buildings. We know that sometimes when buildings, are a bit taller, they can be maybe domineering and maybe, cast a large shadow, all these different effects. And this is kind of a remedy for that. We call them step backs. And as you can see, they kind of step back as the building gets taller to just provide some relief, allow light to get in, and just allow the building to kind of fit in a little bit better. We also have green buffers, which is kind of represented here when there's kind of a smaller scale existing condition that it can kind of be buffered from that. And we also see that here, kind of a larger scale development and a little bit and a space here to kind of step down and provide a buffer and some greenery. And so this kind of gets at that. And then finally, the performance points, you may think of them as bonus points as well. This allows for additional height of buildings, but then these variety of benefits have to be provided, so they earn the points. In the past setting, there was just one max height, and if the developer wanted more, they could go to the ZBA, Zoning Board of Adjustment, and ask for a variance. And that's kind of an unreliable process. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. Even let's say they get it, they go a little bit above, but there's no benefit, there's nothing that they're doing to get that. So this is a new system of acknowledging there can be higher heights, but then there's an earning aspect to that. So this is something that's existing and would also apply to these zoning districts. All right, so I won't get too much into details here because this, once again, there's a lot of kind of context. These are the existing zoning districts as we see. I'll quickly zoom in and point out a few of them. We have the Oakland Public Realm, which are kind of what were kind of these local commercial districts as we see on South Craig and North Craig and Center. We have the residential multi-unit. The VH stands for very high density. So a large portion is kind of multi-unit residential. We have some more multi-unit residential of a medium density. We have the special plan district, which is specifically the one on Center development, and we can definitely talk about that. And then the urban industrial, which is this district along Bellwood, and I referenced some of those legacy industrial character and uses there. And then quickly, we do have our existing heights. This will come into play when we start talking about height. But as we can see, it's kind of a mix. Some are in the 60 to 80 foot range. The parentheses means a special exception. So there's kind of a tier that they can go up to. A large portion has no limit, and that might seem kind of odd, right? It's not completely no limit because there is a density limit, so a units per lot area. So they can't just build as high as they want. There's kind of a limiting factor, and we'll get into what we typically see. Usually around 12 to 13 stories is what could be built today. And what we're proposing will not be too different than the existing heights. Let's see. Okay, so I think with that, I'll quickly talk about the proposed map, which we're no longer in the static PDF world. We have advanced to the we've advanced to the web map. Okay, so what we see here is I'll quickly go over this, but this is the engage page, which will keep you up to date on everything. But for right now, we're going to go to this web map here. And I hope this will be a good tool for everyone as we continue to think about how this maps out. You know, we've learned a lot about these new districts. Let's see how it actually plays out on the map. This is a big part of our proposal and understanding it. So once again, you know, these are those existing districts that we saw. For context, this is the EMI, Educational Medical Institutional District, that covers part of the University of Pittsburgh campus. So that's staying where it is. We're just focusing on this area here. As we pull it across, there's kind of this swipe. So everything on the left is existing. As we pull it across, we see the proposed. And this way we can really see how, you know, all the changes line up. So I'll zoom in kind of here. So one of the big takeaways is that the UCMU will be taking up the majority of the area. As I stated previously, we really do want to celebrate and continue to promote mixed use, flexibility in terms of land use. And so we see this, covering portions the south as we continue up to the north. I'll make one note. We have the UCE, the Employment District, taking a small section, really, a segment of this block here. And I'll quickly kind of touch on the rationale here. We can talk about it more. But essentially, as you can see, especially if I turn on the parcels here, we can see how, these parcels and lots, as I zoom in, are larger and can really accommodate the building footprints that some of these large lab R&D spaces need. It would be challenging with a smaller floor plate, for example, along this street where Goldway and Melwood is. And what we've learned through kind of many discussions is that smaller parcels are more nimble. Residential development is more nimble to fit into some of these pockets. We've already seen some adaptive reuse of buildings for residential. I do want to note there are 2 residential projects, one in construction right here, which is, I think, 10 to 12 stories. Another one right here, also in that same range. So the proposed zoning really allows that and reinforces that residential should and can take place here, but simply just preserving a little bit of space, these larger parcels for employment. So yeah, that's kind of this little bit overview of the condition we see there. Okay, so those are the proposed districts. And as you can kind of see, if we flip back to the land use strategy, it really is kind of a mirroring of those recommendations we saw there. I'll flip back real quickly to talk about height. So so we did step 1, we mapped the districts, and that's our proposal. And then the second thing is we have to figure out the max heights. Because as you see, this is an example from Central and South Oakland. The max heights can go by block. They don't have to stretch over the whole district. That was kind of an inefficiency of old zoning. It makes more sense that the height could kind of be a little bit more granular. And so, for example, we have 2 heights we see here. The first one is the max height with no performance points. So for an example, that would be this 40 feet right here. If a developer chooses to earn performance points based on the criteria of the zoning code, they can, in 15 feet increments, go up to an ultimate maximum height. So when we look at the parentheses, that's the ultimate maximum height. If they want to go any higher than that, then they do need to get the variance. And so it really is the ceiling. And I want to reiterate that. So if you're curious, what is the ultimate, look at the parentheses. We'll quickly think about how building height plays out. This gets a little into the weeds, but there's different floor-to-floor heights for different types of development. So we think about housing. It's a little shorter floor-to-floor, 9 to 10 feet. Office a little bit taller. And then some of those research lab spaces that I was mentioning, even taller. So they need a little bit more room to be accommodated. As I mentioned, if we wanted to have an idea of what could be built with the existing zoning, because it already is, there is some height and development existing. Roughly, we did a test fit, and on a typical half-acre lot, housing could be in that 10 to 12 story range, about 100 to 130 feet. And so then we look at what the Oakland plan recommended. So we went back to that Oakland plan slide when I mentioned that, and it says 9 stories with bonuses. So 9 stories is the ultimate. And so what we do here is we look at 9 stories and accommodating, the largest floor to floor. That's how we get to this around 140 range in the mixed use area, which is the UCMU. And then the plan recommends an additional height bonus for the employment district. It says 15 stories. We actually didn't go as far as this because, that is maybe more applicable in the 5th Forbes corridor. So we don't even go up to this, but that's kind of the guidance that we're working with. And so now we'll come back to the map and we'll take a look at the proposed heights real quick. So we'll turn off the zoning, we'll turn off the proposed zone, we'll turn off the existing zoning, and then the proposed, good. The proposed zoning is off. Okay, good. Now we will turn on the existing max heights, and they'll populate up here. Okay, and so these are the same ones I had on the slide. So if you're really curious about a particular parcel, you can definitely zoom in and really understand, okay, where are these heights and what do they align with? So those are existing ones. Remember, there's the no limit one here. And then we'll turn on the proposed heights as well. And so when we pull over here, you're really going to get to see what we're proposing. I will quickly kind of go over the general intent here. Based on kind of looking at the existing character and conditions of the neighborhood, as you can see, we recommend the highest heights in the kind of center corridors. So this would be Craig Street, Center, 5th. And so that's where we see accommodating the most height given these major corridors that have transit, walkability, and people getting to ease of access essentially, as well as a little bit, deeper lots that could accommodate such development. And then we really see kind of a bell curve, scaling down as we get to the more smaller scale residential areas in Shenley Farms and Shadyside. So there's kind of an intermediate zone, with an ultimate max height of 95 feet. And then the shorter of the zones is only an ultimate max height of 65 feet. So that would be, if we're thinking about stories, because it is sometimes easier to think about that, 65 would kind of be in the 5 to 6 maybe story range for residential. This would also be in kind of the 8 story range for residential. And up here, employment uses would be 9 stories. Residential could be touching, 12 to maybe 13 stories. So that kind of gives you an overview. And then as we move up here, this ultimate 140 continues to parts along North Craig. We do see a stepping down as we get into a smaller scale portion at the very north. And then this is that small section of employment that is just a little bit taller there. So those are the proposed max heights. Okay, one thing here, as we let's focus here on South Craig Street. I will note that if we pull this across, we're really not increasing or touching the existing max heights in South Craig. It's already 60 with an ultimate of 85. So we're keeping that just based on the existing character of what we see is not really at those heights. So there's still capacity there. So there was, no need to change that. This portion did go up to kind of meet that as to complement each other. So we have this here. I think one thing we can do is I will share the Engage page so that you all can continue to work on this map in kind of your own screens. But I'll quickly just return back to the presentation. We're really close to the end here, and thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. Okay, so the next slide, because we may as well just do it now that we're here. These are building envelopes. These are kind of big blocks of what the zoning could accommodate. It's kind of the invisible lines that are out there. And if you fit a building into this envelope or this box, this is what it would look like. But it's not what a building would actually look like given kind of the architectural features. These sites are also not what we have knowledge of as proposed for development. They are just lots that have either a vacant lot or a surface parking lot. So once again, hypothetical, just for demonstration purposes to show, we looked at that height map, but what does it actually look like? We were grateful enough to have support to develop these kind of 3D models, 3D rendering. So I'll quickly show a few of those just to give a context. We see this here. So we're in the UCMU district. This would be North Craig Street. This would be Baum kind of coming over here. So this is 140 feet. This is if the developer used all of the performance points and kind of maxed out. And we can kind of still see that, this is within, actually below some of the existing development we see kind of in this as we work up the hillside. A few other things I'll note is that we do show the step backs here as the building kind of steps away from the main street here. And we also see a little carve out here that is a general representation of what open space could look like, just to understand that a portion of the site would have to accommodate that open space requirement. So here's another site. This is the same height, same district, but just on Center Avenue. Yes, it's at the surface lot of the pharmacy there. It's not something that is proposed. It's just potential if that site could be redeveloped. There would be accommodations for how that would all work out. But it just gives you an idea of that one on Center, still taller than that. So we're not proposing anything of that magnitude. That's at about 170 feet. We could definitely get into talking about one on Center. It was a specially planned district, so it has kind of its own height. Our hope is that by proposing zoning that works for and finds the balance between what developers need to make projects marketable and exchanging for some type of community benefit, they'll use the existing zoning and won't have to make their own special districts, and we can kind of move away from this way of doing zoning. That's the intent behind this new zoning. Here's another sample site, same 140 feet looking North Craig Street. This would be Bayard and some of the existing development, how it fits in the context. See the step backs here. This is just from another angle showing that kind of green space that would be accommodated here and kind of stepping away from the street. This shows the employment district. And so just a little bit more height here, up to 185, showing the step backs as well as space for open space. This is a great representation. It really gives you the full view. And like I said, we're in step with the Oakland plan. It recommended the height we should use. And I think it's really cool to see how largely we see this fits within the existing scale of what we see on the ground. So we're really trying to be respectful and make sure things fit. And then this is just from another angle, kind of looking south back to parts of central Oakland here. Okay, so, all right. So thank you for staying with me this far. 2 quick slides. This is the Engage page. And this is where you can stay up to date as we move forward. You can ask questions, you can make comments. There's a feature where we can respond to your questions. So if you think of something later, we can get into that. There's materials to review, kind of the same things I was sharing. You can look at the map, as I said, and you can stay up to date because we have our timeline here. So I'll quickly just pull that up one more time so we can take a look. So we have our timeline. Here we are in September, and I'll go over the timeline. We have some of these materials I mentioned. We have the map. If you want to dig into some of the code of these existing districts, we can go directly to the code here. And then, yeah, this is the question and answer section. So, yeah, so some people have already joined in, and we had a question from, I believe, Kathy Gallagher, and then we were able to follow up. So we're definitely happy to give responses. I think we're shooting for probably like a week turnaround. But me and Will Gregory are kind of monitoring this so that we can continue the dialogue. And one last thing I'll say is if there happens to be any tweaks or minor revisions based on, feedback or things we hear, we will definitely post them on here and make it clear, okay, there's a little tweak here. And then finally, we can talk more about this, but this just gives you the whole roadmap for how we got here. We started back in the spring talking with stakeholders, so that would be members of the steering committee that work on the Oakland plan to have continuity between the work there and the zoning. We met with the Oakland Task Force in July. We met with the Belfield Area Citizens Association in August, as well as their block party in North Oakland, which is a fun time. It was great to speak with you, some of you in person. And then we also were at OPDC for a Let's Talk. So yeah, August was the month of getting it out. September, we're here, is the time to really get into the details and deal with my long-winded presentation. And then we'll kind of make any adjustments we need, and we'll be ready for Planning Commission. That's the next step in October. So there'll be a briefing and then a hearing and action. This is scheduled. There's a chance it might be tweaked, but we'll update that on the Engage page. And then, of course, for new zoning amendments, final approval is through City Council. So I think with that, I think let's stop sharing. And great. And we have a lot of things in the chat. AJ, would you maybe mind looking through the chat and maybe kind of maybe going through and seeing what we could answer there, and then I can monitor if any folks have raised hands, so we can get to those.
Yes. If we want, we can go to people that have raised their hands first, and then I can go to the chat.
Yeah. So let's think about raised hands first. I'll filter through some of the questions. And while we're waiting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share that link to the Engage page. So that way, and I do apologize, sometimes it's hard to zoom in and see all of the details of the map, but this will allow everyone to kind of zoom in at their own pace.
And if there are no questions, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to note that Chris Beam has his hand up.
Okay.
Sorry, their hand.
Yes, Chris, please go for it. I think you can unmute.
I think I'm unmuted.
Great, yeah.
There are a lot. So in the northern section of this corridor, I'm there frequently. My church is actually located there near the corner of Baum and Craig Street. There are a lot of tall buildings there, and it sounds like this proposed plan will actually make those existing buildings illegal to build again. They're like 15 plus stories tall. So I imagine they're over 150 feet. And I think the max height for this new plan is 140 feet with all the performance points. Are there any considerations for like how you came up with those numbers and if they are likely going to increase? Because I would prefer to see plans that kind of legalize what we have historically built in our city so that we can build it again. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. So a few things to think about. The recommendation from the land use strategy, there was kind of a public discussion and engagement that led to that recommendation of 9 stories as the bonus height. So I'll kind of start with that. That's kind of that's the guidance that we're looking at. I will say that overall, many of the buildings in the heart of North Craig Street, kind of near Bayard, are more in the kind of 100 to 110, 120 range. So we are definitely in alignment there. To your point, there are a few that go a little bit above 140. I will note that as we get to the hillside, there is a dynamic at play with grade change. So it may appear a little bit taller given the grade. And that's something that Will could maybe touch base, because when we determine the max height, as you know, in Pittsburgh, a lot of times buildings, there's a significant grade change. So really thinking about how we, get to kind of the average of that slope and determine it, there's definitely something there. So Will can maybe join in there. And I guess the last thing I'll say there was some pushback that we heard throughout the community of the kind of the bulk and height of one on center, which is at 170. So that could be one rationale for maybe not going up to that. Yeah, so I think that's kind of our general response, and us being in line with what the plan's land use strategy recommended.
Yeah, I could jump in with that discussion around height. So when we're talking about height in the zoning code, it's based on the average finished grade along the front. So if your building is built along a slope, you'll have portions that will be taller and portions that will be shorter because the average finished grade is going to be between them. So I'm not sure if that dynamic is happening in portions of Bigelow or not. But just when we're talking about height, it's not just a flat number. It can be dynamic based on grade, which is typically the condition we see on most Pittsburgh neighborhoods.
And one thing I can just point out, there is some resources that provide us with building height, and so we can look at the existing height of some of those buildings and compare, so that if that's a resource that could be helpful when we're having the discussion of this existing building, what is it? Just want to let you know that's something we can get access to if that would be helpful. So we are comparing apples to apples. And I think we now have a hand up from Eduardo.
Yes, thank you.
Please share.
May I speak?
Yes, please share.
Yeah. So basically, I would not like to see Oakland become downtown or Manhattan. I want it to be a human, lively neighborhood. And, with tall buildings and reducing the width of the sidewalks, like with the latest examples of the building that have been built around the area, that is what's happening. So in the end, okay, I am afraid that, in order to pursue progress, we make the neighborhood less desirable as a place to live, as a place for education, as a place for raising a family. I haven't heard anything about how you are going to attract young families with more schoolings, with more park. It seems that the whole plan is here to give more leeway for development and high rises and rental properties. So I definitely do not like your plan. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing. I think a few things to kind of answer your question. is, you know, some of what could be built in Oakland is dictated by the value of the land and what developers can feasibly finance. And so that's one just inherent thing we see in parts of North Oakland, and why it would accommodate, you know, higher buildings. One thing I will say is that the Oakland plan does recommend a diversity of housing options. So that would mean both within an apartment building, a mix of unit sizes. So that's something that's encouraged. It's not just all 1 bedrooms. It could be 2, it could be 3. That's one thing. Also, if we look at the proposed map, some sections are taller, some are not as tall, some more in the you know, the 4 to 5 story range. And so that's going to produce a different style of development, you know, and creating this kind of mix we're talking about. So yeah, so I think while there is height, it's not the only thing that could be built. And then I think that the final response I would say is thinking about, you know, the sidewalk space, and maybe Will can jump in, but you know, there are standards to ensure that sidewalk space is maintained and has a pleasant pedestrian experience. You know, we can also think about the setbacks and how the building meets the sidewalks, which there's actually some built-in flexibility that the building can meet between 0 and 10 feet. And in that space, there can be more sidewalk or pedestrian space. There can be some landscaping or greenery. And then there's also the open space requirement, which is publicly accessible. So while the building may be close to the street at some points, there's going to be other spaces that can be publicly accessible. So that's just a little bit of thought into, you know, how we're trying to confront, I think, some of your concerns about, you know, building to the full extent of the lot. So. All right, we'll keep looking for hands. I'll also kind of look through the chat to see if we have anything that we really have to bring up. Once again, for some of the first comments, I think were based on kind of how we were presenting things. So I do apologize for the time and the readability, but I really hope that by sharing the map, we can all get into there. So thank you, Andrea, for that. And I think there was another comment in the chat talking about the bonus point system and thinking about the trade-off between height and some of these bonus points. And we did address that question in the engage page, and I think in this presentation. So I think, yeah, I think we've kind of talked about kind of the balance we're looking for. Okay, there's a comment about the step backs and thinking about the shade onto the sidewalks. And so yeah, so that's something we can think about in terms of, you know, the step backs allowing more sun. But you know, I think the general response to that would be, you know, based on the sun at different angles, you know, we would hope that there's kind of a mixture of sun shade. And so there's some things that are kind of out of the control of a particular building. But yeah, one thing I will note on that is that in the review process for certain buildings, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong, when they go through review the planning commission, they can perform a shadow study. And I think that's something that we take into consideration. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the shadow study is required if the building is over 65 feet in the UCMU.
Great, thank you. Yes, Andrea, do you want to jump in?
I did. I just wanted to point out that where there is sunshine penetration to the ground story, that's basically those are the needed conditions for street trees. where you have the public space accessible off of the sidewalk, for example, and you have a slightly larger open space, I think that the thinking in the development of that building form in the Oakland plan was that this would make it easier for there to be street trees at street level.
No,
The idea
thank
that
you.
shade is good and that street trees provide many ancillary benefits in addition to shade.
Thank you for that. Let's see. There was I think there was another comment from Chris here talking about kind of the new zoning district and how it will relate to lot size per unit and minimum parking requirements. That is something that there is a separate zoning proposal that would be citywide that DCP is rolling out that would address lot size per unit and minimum parking requirements. Depending on the timelines of how these get adopted, they could be very close in time, but this is really on a kind of a separate track for, you know, they're not two proposals going together, but they will, the lot size per unit will kind of be a moot point because it only applied to the existing zoning and it will not be applied to the new zoning. The new zoning districts really use the open space and the step backs to kind of form the bulk of the building rather than a traditional setback or a density metric like a lot size per unit. So I know that's getting into some of the weeds, but yes, highlighting a kind of a difference in these new districts.
I think actually, Christian, that speaks to a point that it would be really helpful for us to diagram. And there's a different question in the chat, which is where will we have a recording of this meeting? And I wanted to let everybody know we will have a recording of this meeting on OPDC's website I will give you the link in just a second in case that wasn't the means by which you came to this meeting in the first place. And we'll put the recording there and there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions. We'll also try and diagram out exactly what it is that you were just explaining, Christian, about the different ways in which, you know, the RMU is, or rather this UCMU is governing the building massing within this area. I think we might also be able to make a nice diagram about the maximum heights, because I do think that there is some, it's easy to be confused about what those mean.
Yes, no, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the support. And you know, one thing I'll say is there's kind of a pause is that, you know, we do recognize that this is a lot to kind of take in and digest. And that's why we really, you know, are relying on the engage page to continue the conversation. So there's a question feature and we can respond to that. Like I said, you're able to really scrutinize the map. And so as we continue to get those questions and observations, we can respond with the needed resources. So. Okay, I'm kind of filtering through some of the comments. I'm down to a comment by David talking about the use. And yes, you know, there's a mix of use, both you know, residential, commercial, office, employment uses are all permitted within a certain building. You could have multiple uses. So that also provides flexibility. You could see ground floor retail, restaurant. You could see upper floor office. You could see upper floor residential. So, and you know, these are things we see in kind of the historic pattern of what was built maybe before zoning. You know, I think of, I believe it's the King Edward building where Butter Joint is, a fine restaurant with some great pierogies. You know, that's one example of, you know, housing on the top floors and, you know, restaurant retail on the bottom. So yes, so that would definitely be accommodated in this new district. In many ways, these new districts are trying to take the good of the established character that were sometimes pre-existing before zoning, but also take some of the new lessons we've learned in terms of providing more open space, providing sustainability elements. So yeah, that's kind of how we, you know, kind of came full circle here.
I think that answers all the questions that were in the chat and the Q&A.
All right. Okay, yes, we have a hand raised from Jeff. Please unmute and go ahead, Jeff.
Christian, AJ, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this session. It's really helpful. And as an Oakland resident, I think it's exciting to see some new development and life come into the neighborhood for sure. And I appreciate the care and the thought that is being given to all of this, as well as community engagement. One question that I have for you, a little bit philosophical. We're talking essentially about increasing the population of the neighborhood, higher densities, more development. What ideas are going through your group's mind in terms of public amenities, you know, things that would accompany that increased level of development, things like parks, community amenities, and the like?
Yeah, no, thank you for those thoughts, and that's a great question. I know Andrea's smiling because a lot of us, there's a lot of great recommendations in the Oakland plan, and one of those is thinking about community services. And we could even put the link in here, but there's a recommendation for a community service hub. And there's one in North Oakland, and it's kind of on the site of the Heron Hill pumping station and the grounds, the auxiliary building and the ground. So the vision for that, which is still being developed, but is laid the foundation in the plan, would be an outdoor open space, and as well as facility improvements to have indoor programming, which could be a variety of you know, service-oriented programming that would appeal to both the student population as well as the more mature population, and be a space where, you know, everyone can kind of come together and have what we call a third space. So yeah, that is a real key part of the Oakland plan. It's something that our partners on this call are actively, you know, working on. That's the first one that comes to mind. I'm sure there are others. If we took a moment, Andrea, feel free to chime in. But that's the big one, that, because we identified in the plan that there's limited space in terms of open space and in terms of like true community spaces. So
there was a group of graduate students in architecture and urban planning that took a look at this area a couple of years ago as a kind of a study ground, and it was striking to us who sort of, you know, lived in that neighborhood and, you know, lived with it for a very long time, to see what fresh eyes can see. And it really struck all of the students almost immediately that there is no open space in North Oakland that is not surface parking. And that, you know, so their thoughts and their proposals had to do with, like, how can you activate parking lots to become more accessible and more, you know, publicly responsive. But I think that there's a lot of room in the rezoning up here in which surface parking as a primary use is no longer a permitted use. It's no longer going to be the case as it currently is legal for people to do, to tear down a building in order to be able to make a surface parking lot. You can no longer do that, not even temporarily. And so the hope is, honestly, that we might be able to come up with different ways to reactivate those spaces. We'll see. It's not an easy question, not an easy problem to solve.
thank you, Andrea. All right, we'll just take one more moment. If there's any final thoughts, final questions. All right, well, I do want to thank you all. Like I said, I appreciate your patience. Zoning can be complex. There's a lot going on here, and you know, we are here to continue to be a resource, answer questions both in the Engage page and through our existing Oakland network. So definitely continue to reach out, and we will confirm the Planning Commission hearing dates and briefing, and make sure that is all shared with you. So thank you again, and it's been a great team effort. Thank you to all the stakeholders and everyone all the public that's been involved, asked good questions along the way. So thank you. All righty. Okay, good evening, everyone. Take care.
Great job, Christian.
Thank you.